Matthew Selekman, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Could you start by giving us an overview of what collaborative brief therapy is?
Collaborative strength-based brief therapy has been evolving since, I want to say, 1986. The base core model is called solution-focused brief therapy, and the major emphasis in that model is on what's right with people rather than what's wrong with people, and building off of clients' strengths and resources and past successes and resiliency protective factors to empower them to achieve their goals as quickly as possible. Sometimes we are faced with more challenging families that do not respond well to that kind of positive, optimistic approach, and we have to pursue other pathways. And so a very compatible model is called narrative therapy, where basically that model is about how we are story-making beings. And we write stories about ourselves based on our experiences in the world. And sometimes other people write stories about us, and if we're a child that has particular behavior problems in school, oftentimes a dominant story is created, an oppressive story that this young person has attention deficit disorder. And then all of a sudden, the teacher and everybody else at the school and everybody else that's concerned about this young person is going to be looking for signs and symptoms that will confirm that new framework or new way of understanding the kid's behavior. So narrative therapy is useful. I also use what's called brief strategic problem-focused therapy, where we look at the problem life support system. We look at what everybody is trying to do, like the parent's attempted solution, the teacher, everybody else that's involved, and how in their best efforts, and oftentimes caring efforts, are perpetuating whatever the presenting difficulties are. So we use certain intervention strategies to disrupt those patterns.
That sounds really interesting. Could you give us a specific example?
Yes, I had a single-parent mother who had a 12-year-old boy who was ruling the roost. Dad was out of the picture, and somehow this boy got too big for his britches, and mother overindulged him. He was an only child. And so now that he's getting older, he wants to be out later. And so he's deciding to break curfew on a regular basis, and rather than coming home at 8 or 9, he's coming home at 11 and 12, sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning. So the mother tried everything to stop this behavior, and finally she was at her wit's end, and I said, you know, it sounds like it's too predictable. Your son, everything that you've tried, your son is aware that what you're going to try and do to resolve the difficulty. So we need to do something different, maybe something off the wall and surprising. So she decides to go to a toy store and buy a toy clock and set her alarm clock for the amount of time he comes late home. Over curfew, she's going to wake herself up and teach him how to tell time, because obviously he doesn't know how to tell time. And I thought this was so creative. She came up with this idea. So she made it an ordeal for him to come home late. And so he soon discovered, when he was being awakened at 2 in the morning, in the heart of his REM sleep, that I don't like this. And so he started coming home early. So that's an example of breaking a pattern.
Very creative.
Yeah, very creative.
Very creative.
Very creative. And then, of course, when we're working with children, many of them are not that verbal. They can't connect their thoughts and feelings. And so therefore, I think it's useful to use art therapy methods. One example is I have this imaginary feelings x-ray machine, which is a special machine that's going to show us pictures of what they think their feelings look like inside. And I have them, to the best of their ability, draw their feelings where they live in the body, and scenes from their life that capture those feelings. And oftentimes this is very revealing. We'll have a young boy showing a volcano erupting, representing his anger, angry about something that the parents are doing that's upsetting. Or one kid, and this was kind of sad, the father had an alcoholism problem, and the parents were divorced. And the father would forget, he'd black out and forget to pick up his son for a visitation. So the son, who's depressed, 10 years old, drew a padlock over his heart, saying he wasn't going to let his father in there anymore. Really powerful stuff. And to do that in the company of a family can be very newsworthy and lead to new understanding behind the behavior and compassion and support. So I use a lot of art therapy methods and teach young children mindfulness meditation, how to become observers of their thoughts and feelings rather than reactors. And I love to share with them, and I break it down in a concrete way, Rumi's The Guest House, which is a wonderful poem about how thoughts and feelings might be trying to tell us something, and that we need to greet them at the front door just like we would friends. So I kind of introduce this to children as, you know, when your best friends come over to the house, do you greet them at the front door and say, well, you can only stay for a half an hour and this is what I want to do with you? Or are you a gracious host or hostess? And, you know, I'm so happy you're here, and what would you like to do? And you're free to stay as long as you want. So I have them start to look at these oppressive thoughts and feelings that are pushing them around as guests in their house, and that we need to be respectful, and they're free to stay as long as they wish. And there's actually been some research that has shown, some of the neuroscience research, that especially powerful emotions that oppress the clients that we work with tend to subsist around 25-30 minutes. So if we can teach kids how to sit with those powerful thoughts and feelings without reacting or acting out, externalizing, or taking it out of themselves in some way, they will develop the capacity to self-regulate and soothe themselves and quiet their mind from all the clutter. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's an integrative, flexible approach, and I try and tailor fit what I do with the unique characteristics and needs of the clients.
In some of the examples you've given, you've mentioned just children or adolescents, and in others you've also referred to their parents. Are you working always with children and their parents, or just sometimes? How do you decide who you're going to work with in this process?
Well, I usually leave it up to the clients to determine how often we meet. They decide what the goals are. Even children can say, you know, this is one thing that my parents do that upsets me. And they like the fact that you're willing to be their advocate.
But the child would be saying that in a session on their own, or their parents would be there?
Well, what I like to do is work with parts of the system. So I'll start with the family group just to see what a slice of life looks like at home. And they will show you their dance in your office. And then I usually meet alone with parents. And there we look at all their attempted solutions, where they feel stuck. And maybe we'll establish a separate goal, something they'd like to work on changing. And sometimes parents would like to learn how to nag less or yell less. And when you explore with them, you might find that, you know, when you ask questions like, I'm curious, when you were growing up, did blaming get between you and your parents in your relationship and cause havoc there? And oftentimes they'll say, yeah. And then you can externalize that pattern that they find themselves reenacting with their kid, and disrupt it that way. Or give them some project to do, you know, a change project to work on. And then I'll meet along with the child, and there I'll find out about what they would like me to work on changing with the parents, and what their goals and best hopes are and expectations. And I get a lot of kids that have had lots of counseling, so I really want to put them in the expert position to inform me about what to avoid at all costs.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know you have a great deal of experience and recognition for working with difficult adolescents. Can you tell us something about your personal, particular techniques for success?
Well, first of all, I don't get intimidated by the tough outer facade. I mean, I work with gang-involved youth and youth who've had lots of treatment. And I know, I start with the assumption that within them are jewels, certain natural gifts that they possess that are just waiting to be accentuated. And so my emphasis is on finding those jewels and empowering them to utilize their natural gifts to resolve whatever they wish to change. So I make it very clear to them that I'm not here to fix them, change them, and that I want to be totally different than anybody else they've worked with. So I'll ask them, you know, if you were to work with the most perfect counselor or therapist, what would he or she do that you'd find to be most helpful? And they will not hesitate to tell you what to do and what to avoid at all costs. But I find that really helpful to start that way, that my job isn't to tell you how to live your life. And I know this is a drag for you to be forced to see me. But I just want you to know that while we're working together, if there's something that is really stressing you out, anything, I am prepared to help you out in the best way that I know how, if that time comes. And that lowers the guards usually, and then they're open to telling me why they're really there, which may be completely unrelated to something else, the referring reason.
Why they're referred.
So I find it really important to not adopt a confrontational stance with them, but instead take a non-directive, curious stance to come to know their story. I work a lot with young people that self-injure, and so I'm very curious about how that's benefited them. What advantages has it provided for them, and how does it fit into their life story? And that may be very different than another therapist who got all anxious about, oh, they're cutting, so they must be suicidal. So let's go for a no suicide contract without even coming to to know their story and building a relationship with them.
You mentioned something very interesting that, well, it's all fascinating, but that I'm interested in looking a little bit further at this disjunct that it can be between what a child is referred for and what they end up asking you for help for. Can you just give us an example of that?
I had this 17-year-old sent my way who used to cut herself a lot with a razor blade. And she's been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder. She's on a whole host of medications, and psychiatrically hospitalized 5 times, and saw a lot of outpatient therapists before me. And recently she cut herself at school. And a lot of schools panic, and because of liability issues, they go for a psychiatric hospitalization. But in this case, because I had a history working with this high school, her dean at the high school, sort of like an administrator, said, called the mom and said, look, I'd like you to take your daughter over to see Mr. Selekman for an assessment to figure out what's going on. So I have these swivel chairs in my office, and I noticed that she liked to swivel a lot. And I noticed that whenever I tried to directly ask a question of her, she would turn her back. I'd get the back. She hates therapy with a passion. But Mom was doing all the talking. So I had Mom step out. And I had this crazy idea, which I shared with her. And I said, how about if we spin 4 times to the right, and then 4 times to the left, and we'll meet in the center. And if there's something you wish to talk about, we can talk then. And so we started spinning. And finally we completed our second set of circles. And she looks at me and says, dude, you're nuts. And it just broke the ice, because I said, okay, what's up? What's going on with, what happened recently that, made you cave into cutting again? And that's when she told me what happened. Her best friend, they got into a fight, and she was worried that would be the end of their relationship. And I said, would you like some help with that? And she said, absolutely. I don't want to lose my friendship. And then we had a goal. That had nothing to do, really with what everybody wanted me to fix, in a sense. I mean, the real issue was peer drama. Which is a big deal for teenagers.
It is.
It's social death when you lose your friends. So that's what.
So humour is a big part of of your work. What's so effective about it?
Well, first of all, it takes the sting out of whatever people's concerns are. Second of all, it's disarming. I mean, it lowers the guards. It relaxes people. They see that you're fun and playful. I always know that I'm off to a good start at the end of the first session when the kid says, that was fun. Because I know I'm going to get them back. And it was a different experience than the serious psychologist that asked them how they felt about things and wanted to take a long history and, was talking labels and siding with the parents against them, So I think humor and playfulness, it really works well with teenagers because they're so energetic. And they love off-the-wall therapists and absurdities and stuff like that. So it works really well.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. I know you've also written on the subject of resilience.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Can you start with giving us a description of what it is?
Well, for me, resilience, some kids come into this world with genetics where the nature of their temperament, the nature of their person, their constitutional givens, they're hardier than other kids. They have this inner strength where they're tougher, where they can handle life challenges better than other kids. But I also think that certainly the way that the parents interact with their kids and have created a safe, trusting relationship where they can count on their parents to soothe them when they're stressed out, or that gets internalized and that becomes a part of their inner self. And so when they are faced later on with struggles, they're able to soothe themselves, they're able to calm themselves. Some kids just by nature can seek out others. I'm real inspired by the work of E.J. Anthony, who's a child psychiatrist in St. Louis, who's studied resilient, he calls them super kids, resilient kids who grew up in violent homes or had parents that were schizophrenic or heroin addicts. And somehow they found those adult inspirational others in their communities. It could be a teacher, a clergy, an adult friend of the family, a relative, that they would turn to when they were stressed out or worried for support and advice. And knowing that they had these people in their lives that they can connect with, help them through tough times. So for me, resilience has many sides, and I agree with Bruce Perry, who said that it's a process, that not all kids are born with that hardy temperament, that evolves over time through good parenting practices and great experiences with those adult inspirational others, as well as having the ability to build relationships and sustain them, has helped them through tough times, and success in school.
And how would you help a child who has lost that resilience?
Well, I think, again, having them identify, if they haven't looked for those adult inspirational others, who are those people? Who are their resource people in their social network, close friends that they've been able to count on? That is always something that they can fall back on to help them through a tough, adverse situation. But I'm also interested in their past successes. I want to know about the times where they were faced with some other painful loss, loss of a pet, and how they coped with that. What worked that we might be able to use in another area to help them tough it out, persevere.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're out of time.
Okay.
So thank you very much indeed
Thank you
for coming this afternoon.
Thank you.